Alara had always known fear. It was woven into the walls of her father's old house, whispered in the chill of the corridors, and sharpened in the cold glances of her stepmother, Lady Morwen. At 18, Alara was on the brink of womanhood. Yet she felt as fragile as the winter frost that clung to the edges of her window. Her stepmother's son, young and golden, was always the favored child. Alara's existence, in comparison, felt like a shadow necessary only as a warning or a pawn. That evening, the sky was dark, thick clouds swallowing the moon, leaving only the glimmer of stars to mark the passage of time. The village slept, unaware of the danger that stirred beyond its borders. Alara moved silently through the halls, carrying a candle whose flame trembled as if it sensed her anxiety. Her heart thudded like a war drum, each beat echoing the dread she had tried to ignore all her life. Alara. The voice was soft, yet icy, carrying the weight of command. Lady Morwen stood at the end of the hall, draped in black silk that shimmered like water under torchlight, her eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on Alara. It is time. Alara's pulse quickened. She had learned the signs when Lady Morwen said those words. It never meant anything good for her. Time for what? She asked, her voice small, almost swallowed by the shadows. To save my son, Morwen replied, a bitter edge underlining her calm tone. You will go to Kaelin, the scarred Alpha King. You will serve him. Alara froze. The legends were older than the stones of their village. Kaelin, the scarred king, ruler of the northern lands, feared by kings and commoners alike, he was said to carry the weight of curses on his body, scars that were not just skin-deep but engraved into his very soul. No one returned from his court unchanged, and many did not return at all. You want me to go there? Alara whispered, terror creeping up her spine. Morwen's face hardened. Yes, you will go. My son's life depends on it. Do not argue. This is your fate. Alara's hands shook as she stepped back, the candle flickering wildly, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. Her mind spun with questions, disbelief, and rising fear. How could her stepmother betray her in such a way? The woman had smiled at her only days before, praising her manners, her beauty. Was it all a lie? I cannot, she stammered. You can, Morwen said, her voice final, slicing through the air. You must. If you fail, he dies. If you succeed, perhaps you survive. Before Alara could respond, Morwen turned, leaving her alone in the hall. The words echoed in her ears, and she realized the full weight of what was to come. She was to be a tribute, a living offering to a king who was said to be more shadow than man. The journey to Kaelin's lands was long and treacherous. Alara traveled under the cover of night, escorted by silent guards who never spoke. Their faces hidden beneath dark hoods, every mile carried her further from home, further from safety, and closer to the unknown. Her thoughts returned again and again to the stories of Kaelin, the way he ruled with fear, the strength of his army, the curse that lay over him. They whispered that he was capable of destroying kingdoms with a word, bending the will of men and women alike, and she, small, trembling Alara, was to be his next pawn. When the fortress came into view, rising like a black tooth from the earth, she could hardly believe her eyes. Towers of obsidian and stone jutted into the sky, shrouded in mist and shadow. The air itself seemed to shiver as they approached, heavy with the scent of iron and smoke. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The gates opened with a grinding sound, and the guards ushered her into a courtyard where shadows seemed to breathe. She saw Kaelin for the first time then, stepping down from the steps of his throne hall. Even in the dim light, he was terrifying and magnificent. His body was scarred in a map of jagged lines, each one telling a story of battles, betrayals, and survival. His eyes, dark and piercing, swept over her like a storm, measuring, calculating. You are the girl my court whispers about, he said, his voice deep and steady, carrying the weight of command and curiosity. Alara, is it? Alara's throat tightened. Yes, Your Majesty. Kaelin studied her, and in that moment, she felt as though he could see not just her body, but the tremors of her heart, the fear, the anger, the confusion. The stories of the scarred king had not prepared her for this intensity. He did not speak with cruelty or kindness, only an even, unsettling scrutiny that made her skin prickle. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "My stepmother," she said. He raised a hand, stopping her. "Do not speak of her here. You are mine now. And in my court, truth is measured not in words, but in deeds." Elara swallowed hard. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She understood, somehow, that survival would demand more than obedience. It would demand courage, cunning, and perhaps something she did not yet have: the strength to face the darkness in him and in herself. Days passed in the shadow of the fortress. Elara learned the routines of the court, the unspoken rules of loyalty and fear. Servants and courtiers watched her with a mixture of pity and curiosity, whispering tales of her stepmother's cruelty and the king's temper. She kept her head down, learning to move without attracting attention, but Kaelin's eyes always found her. At times, he would speak, testing her wit, observing her reactions, pushing her limits, and in those moments, she saw flashes of something unexpected. A man who had been carved by pain and betrayal, but who still retained the smallest sparks of humanity. He was terrifying, yes, but also fascinating. One night, Kaelin summoned her to the Hall of Shadows, a room where the walls were lined with ancient tapestries and the air smelled of smoke and old magic. "Walk with me," he commanded, and she obeyed, heart hammering. They moved in silence until he stopped before a window overlooking the forest, black and endless beneath the moonlight. "Do you fear me?" he asked, not as a king, but as a man. Elara hesitated. I do," she admitted, the truth trembling on her lips. "I do not know if I can survive here." Kaelin's expression did not change, yet his eyes softened ever so slightly. "Fear is not weakness. It is the first step toward strength. You will need both, girl. For the path ahead is not meant for the faint of heart." Elara met his gaze, and in that instant, something shifted. She felt the weight of his scrutiny. Yes, but also an unspoken acknowledgement of her courage, small, flickering, but undeniable. Suddenly, a horn echoed through the fortress. Guards ran to the ramparts, shouting, and the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Kaelin's body tensed, and he moved closer to her. A silent shield of power and presence. Elara realized, with a jolt of fear and awe, that she was not merely a prisoner. She was now part of a dangerous game, a living piece on a board she barely understood. Her survival depended on her courage, her wits, and perhaps the king's favor. Kaelin's hand rested briefly on the back of a chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "Stay close," he said softly, almost a whisper, "and learn quickly. The world beyond these walls is not kind to those who falter." As she left the Hall of Shadows that night, Elara's mind raced. The fortress loomed behind her like a beast waiting to pounce. Yet the seed of defiance had taken root in her heart. She understood, finally, that her life, her very soul, was now entwined with the scarred Alpha King. And deep down, a single thought burned in her mind: "I will survive. I must survive. And perhaps, I will change him too." The wind howled outside the fortress walls, carrying with it the whispers of a kingdom that had long feared Kaelin's wrath. And as Elara lay on her hard cot that night, staring at the shadowed ceiling, she knew one truth above all. The price of survival was only just beginning, and the shadows of the king's world would test her in ways she could never imagine. The fortress of Kaelin was alive with shadow and whispers. Elara moved through its halls cautiously, feeling the weight of countless eyes watching her, judging her, wondering what she might do next. Even though she had survived her first encounter with the scarred Alpha King, the fear that had once consumed her now mingled with curiosity. There was something magnetic about Kaelin, something that drew her gaze even when she tried to look away. Every day brought new tests. Kaelin was a master of control, watching his court with the precision of a hawk. Servants spoke in hushed tones about the girl who had survived the winter solstice offering. The girl who had dared to meet the king's eyes without breaking. Some pitied her. Others whispered that she might be foolish. Elara learned quickly that survival required more than obedience. She observed, listened, and memorized the patterns of the fortress. She learned when to speak and when to remain silent, when to avoid the sharp tongues of the nobles, and when to approach Kaelin for a word. He tested her often, sometimes with riddles, sometimes with tasks meant to push her patience or courage. One afternoon, he sent her into the archives of the fortress, a place so ancient and filled with dust that even the air seemed thick with history. Find the record of the northern battles, he had instructed, his eyes lingering on her as if measuring the tremor in her voice. Elara knelt among the towering shelves of scrolls and books, her fingers tracing the brittle pages. Each story of blood, betrayal, and valor reminded her of the life she had lost and the world she had entered. Kaelin's voice, calm and commanding, echoed in her mind. Fear is not weakness, courage is learned. She repeated it silently, letting the words steel her nerves. Days turned into weeks. Elara's movements became more confident, her mind sharper. Yet, for all her growth, she could not escape Kaelin's gaze. Sometimes it was a weight, heavy and intimidating, and other times, a spark of something she could not name, something dangerous and thrilling. One evening, Kaelin summoned her to the Hall of Shadows once more. The torches flickered, casting long shapes on the walls, making the room seem alive. He was already there, standing tall, his scars outlined by the dancing flames. "Do you understand the power you are under?" he asked, voice low and steady. Elara nodded, swallowing her fear. I believe I am beginning to." Kaelin studied her for a long moment, then moved closer. "Belief is not enough. You must act, even when fear whispers to run. You must decide where your loyalty lies, even when the choice is painful." Elara felt a shiver pass through her. These words were more than instructions. They were a challenge. Could she stand beside a man so feared, so scarred, and yet begin to understand him? Could she find the strength to face not only the king's trials but her own growing fascination with him? Her chance to prove herself came sooner than expected. Rumors reached her that Lady Morwen had not relinquished her schemes. The stepmother had sent agents into the fortress, emissaries who sought to manipulate Kaelin, to use Elara's presence as leverage. Elara learned this through whispers, overheard in the corridors, and her heart sank. One night, she found herself in the courtyard, where the moonlight cut through the mist. Kaelin appeared silently, as though he had stepped from the shadows themselves. "You are awake late," he observed, his gaze sweeping over her. Elara hesitated, then said, I overheard something. Lady Morwen's agents. They are here, watching. She wants to control you through me." Kaelin's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes darkened. "And what would you have me do?" I want to protect you," Elara whispered, her own fear mingling with determination. "I cannot let her use me or anyone else to harm you or the fortress." Kaelin's lips twitched, almost a smile, though it did not reach his eyes. "You are bold, girl. Perhaps too bold." He paused, and for a brief moment, Elara saw the weight of his scars reflected in his gaze. Memories of betrayal, of battles fought and lost, of power that demanded isolation. "You risk much," he said finally. And yet, the next day, the emissaries struck. They crept into the fortress under the cover of dawn, hoping to surprise Kaelin. But Elara, alert and prepared, intercepted them in the corridors. Her courage shone brighter than she had imagined, and she confronted the intruders with a clarity and fearlessness that even she did not expect. "You will not harm anyone," she said firmly, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Leave now, or face Kaelin's wrath and mine." The intruders faltered, unsure of this young girl who faced them without weapons, yet radiated authority. Before they could act further, Kaelin appeared, his presence overwhelming and immediate. He moved with the precision of a predator, and the intruders understood at once that resistance was futile. Ilara stepped back, feeling a mixture of awe and relief. Kaylin's gaze swept over her, and for the first time, she thought she saw a trace of gratitude, of acknowledgement. That night, in the Hall of Shadows, Kaylin approached her once more. The tension between them was palpable, unspoken, yet undeniable. "You risked much today," he said quietly, almost a whisper. "Not many would have the courage or the cunning to face such danger." Ilara's cheeks warmed. I wanted to help, to protect you." Kaylin's eyes softened, a rare gesture for a man so feared. "And yet, you also risked yourself. That is bravery, girl. Not just survival, but choice." Ilara felt her heart tighten. The words touched something deep inside her. A recognition that she was no longer merely a pawn. No longer merely a frightened girl. She was beginning to become someone who mattered, someone whose choices could shape the fate of the fortress, and perhaps even the scarred king himself. Days passed, and Ilara continued to navigate the dangerous waters of Kaylin's court. She learned the names of his closest advisors, the secrets hidden in the ancient scrolls of the fortress, and the delicate balance of fear and respect that kept the kingdom under control. She also learned more about Kaylin, the man behind the legend. She saw his patience with the young soldiers, his quiet moments of reflection, and the way he carried the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders. She saw the loneliness that came with power, and the pain that lingered beneath his scars. One evening, she found him alone in the northern tower, gazing at the stars. The wind whipped through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of frost and pine. "You wonder at the world beyond," Kaylin said, not turning to her. I do," Ilara admitted. "I wonder if I could ever truly belong here. In this fortress. With you." Kaylin's gaze met hers, steady and intense. "Belonging is earned, Ilara. And trust. Trust is harder still. You will need both, if you are to survive, and if you are to remain in my eyes." Ilara felt a thrill and a chill at once. She understood then that their relationship was shifting, not yet love, not yet friendship, but something between fear and fascination. Something neither could define. That night, as she lay in her small chamber, Ilara thought of her stepmother, of the sacrifices made, of the courage she had summoned. She understood now that her survival was no longer only about fear. It was about strength, choice, and the delicate, dangerous spark growing between her and Kaylin. And in the shadowed halls of the fortress, Kaylin watched her from afar, unreadable, yet undeniably aware of her presence. The girl who had been offered as a tribute was no longer merely a pawn. She was becoming something far more dangerous. A companion to the scarred king, a spark in the darkness, and perhaps a key to the redemption he had long denied himself. The night was heavy with storm clouds, and lightning danced over Kaylin's fortress like the fingers of some unseen god. Ilara stood at the edge of the northern wall. Her cloak whipped by the wind. She could feel the tension in the air, sharp and electric. She had learned to trust her instincts, to sense danger before it arrived, and tonight, she knew it was coming. Lady Morwen's agents had not abandoned their schemes. They had infiltrated the fortress under the cover of darkness, carrying with them a curse, dark magic meant to bind Kaylin, to force him to obey the stepmother's will. Ilara had intercepted whispers, pieced together clues, and now she understood the magnitude of the threat. Kaylin emerged from the shadows silently, his tall figure cutting a striking silhouette against the storm-lit sky. His scars gleamed under the flashes of lightning, and his eyes, dark and piercing, were fixed on the horizon. "They move faster than expected," he said, voice low, almost blending with the wind. "Are you ready?" Ilara's hands trembled slightly, but she lifted her chin, feeling the strength that had grown within her. "I am," she said. "We can face them together." Kaylin's gaze softened, fleetingly, at her courage. For a man long shaped by scars, betrayal, and fear, the sight of this girl standing firm beside him was unfamiliar and unsettling. Yet it stirred something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The agent struck suddenly. moving through the fortress corridors with a speed that betrayed their experience. Shadows leapt from the corners, carrying magic that bent the air and made the stones quake. Elara and Kaelin met them at the courtyard, side by side. "You will not harm this fortress or me," Kaelin commanded, his voice carrying the power of a king and the weight of a warrior who had faced countless battles. Elara stepped forward, holding her ground. She did not possess the strength of soldiers trained in war, but she had learned to read, to anticipate, to act with clarity under pressure. She called out instructions to the guards, guiding them with precision, ensuring no harm came to the innocent. The battle was swift, chaotic, and dangerous. Magic clashed against steel, shadows swirled around them, and the fortress seemed alive, responding to the tension and fear of its inhabitants. Kaelin moved with terrifying skill, his every strike measured, his every movement powerful yet precise. Through it all, Elara remained close. She dodged and weaved, used her wits to disrupt the agent's attacks, and shielded those around her. She felt fear. Yes, but also an exhilaration, a clarity of purpose she had never known. And all the while, Kaelin's eyes never left her, assessing, protecting, admiring. In the heart of the chaos, one of the agents unleashed the curse directly at Kaelin. Shadows surged toward him, black and writhing, attempting to bind his power and crush his will. Elara acted without thought, stepping between them. She raised her hands, calling on every ounce of courage and knowledge she had gained. "Leave him!" she shouted, her voice ringing over the storm. The curse faltered, disrupted by her sheer force of will and clarity of purpose. Kaelin saw the moment, lunged forward, and with a swift motion, broke the spell, sending the agent sprawling. For a heartbeat, the storm fell silent. Kaelin and Elara stood among the chaos, breathing heavily, hearts pounding. In that instant, something shifted between them. The fear, the tension, the fascination all combined into a bond neither could deny. "You risked your life for me," Kaelin said quietly, his voice carrying both awe and emotion. "Why?" Elara met his gaze, unwavering. "Because it is right. Because I do not want to be used as a pawn any longer. Because I care. Kaelin's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, the scarred warrior allowed himself to feel not as a king, not as a legend feared across kingdoms, but as a man who had long carried the weight of pain, loss, and isolation. And in that moment, he understood that he had not been alone in his suffering. Elara had borne her own, and she had chosen to fight beside him, not against him. The agents were defeated, fleeing into the storm. Lady Morwen's treachery had been thwarted, but the victory was not without cost. The fortress bore scars of its own, and Kaelin's mind was heavy with the knowledge that enemies still lurked beyond the walls. In the aftermath, Kaelin led Elara to the northern tower, the one that overlooked the forests, stretching endlessly into the night. The storm had passed, leaving the world wet and glimmering under the moonlight. "You have changed," Kaelin said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "Not just yourself, but this fortress. Even me." Elara looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear, relief, and something she could not yet name. "And you have changed me," she said. "From a girl who only knew fear, to someone who can stand, who can choose, who can fight." Kaelin's hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, gentle in contrast to the strength he carried. "I did not know it was possible," he admitted. "For so long, I thought my heart was lost to the shadows. But you have made me remember what it is to care, to protect, to feel." Elara felt her chest tighten, emotions swirling like a storm. She had feared him, had respected him, and now she was beginning to understand him. To see the man behind the scars, the soul behind the legend. They stood together in silence, the night around them quiet and peaceful, as if the world itself held its breath. And in that quiet, a new understanding passed between them, a bond forged in fear, courage, and shared survival. "You will not be a pawn again," Kalen said finally, his voice firm. "I will not allow it. You are under my protection, Elara, and I swear it with my name, my honor, and my strength." Elara felt tears prick her eyes, not from fear, but from relief and something deeper. A recognition that she had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." Kalen's gaze softened, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "You have earned it. Not through words, but through courage, and through your heart." As dawn broke over the fortress, casting light on the black stone towers and the wet forests beyond, Elara and Kalen stood side by side, scarred and transformed. They had faced betrayal, darkness, and fear, and emerged stronger, bound together by choice, courage, and a growing respect that teetered on the edge of something more. Yet even in their triumph, they knew the world was not without danger. The stepmother's schemes were not the only threat, and Kalen's kingdom would always demand vigilance. But for now, in this quiet moment, they allowed themselves to feel something they had long denied: hope. Elara realized that survival was not enough. She wanted more. She wanted trust, companionship, and the chance to be part of something greater than herself. And as she looked at Kalen, she understood that he too, for the first time in decades, was willing to embrace the possibility of connection, of redemption, of love. They would face the future together, not as king and ward, not as prisoner and captor, but as two souls who had been tested in fire and shadow, who had found strength in each other, and who had chosen to fight not just for survival, but for something far more precious: each other. The wind carried the scent of rain and pine, and the fortress, though scarred, stood proud and unbroken. And in that moment, Elara knew that whatever darkness awaited them beyond the walls, they would meet it as one. The scarred Alpha King and the girl who had been sacrificed were no longer bound by fear alone. They were bound by trust, courage, and the fragile, unspoken promise of something enduring. And for the first time, in a long time, Kalen allowed himself to imagine a future that was not ruled by pain, but by choice, and perhaps by love.